October 1942, Station 105, Chelston Airfield, England. The morning light struggled to pierce the damp English haze as another ambulance screeched to a halt outside the surgical tent. Inside, under the dim glow of lamps, Colonel Malcolm Cummings Grow leaned over yet another wounded airman. His gloved hands, steady but weary, worked to remove fragments of German flak from the young navigator's chest. The jagged metal had torn through leather and flesh as though neither offered resistance. Grow had seen this pattern too many times. The entry wound, the trajectory, the splintered tissue, all told the same grim story. The fragments moved at low velocity. They had lost much of their killing speed before impact, but without protection, even a dying shard could end a man's life. Outside, the engines of returning B-17s thundered through the airfield mist, engines coughing and sputtering after limping back from another raid over occupied Europe. The distant wail of sirens announced more ambulances on the way. Grow paused, wiping the blood from his hands, staring at the young face on the table. This one would live. Barely. Others he knew would not. The mathematics of death were becoming unbearable. Nearly 70% of the wounded passing through his care carried the same kind of injury: low-speed shrapnel and twisted fragments from anti-aircraft shells or from the aircraft itself splintered by explosions and turned into deadly projectiles inside those aluminum coffins. That morning, Colonel Grow made a decision that would alter the course of aerial warfare. These wounds, he realized, were preventable. The technology to prevent them already existed. It simply needed to be applied. Someone just had to ask the right question in the right place. Within months, that question would begin to save lives. Thousands of them. It began months earlier, on August 17, 1942, when the 97th Bomb Group launched the first American heavy bomber mission of the war. 18 B-17 flying fortresses crossed the English Channel to strike railway yards at Rouen-Sotteville in occupied France. Major Paul Tibbets led 12 bombers to the primary target, while 6 others flew diversionary routes. Against light opposition, all aircraft returned safely. But the illusion of safety wouldn't last. As the 8th Air Force pushed deeper into German-held territory through the autumn and winter of 1942, the cost of daylight bombing became brutally clear. Medical officers began compiling data: every wound, every casualty. The analysis that arrived on Grow's desk in October stunned everyone. The assumption had been that machine gun fire from German fighters, the dreaded Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts, would be the primary killer. Instead, the data showed something else entirely. 70% of all bomber crew wounds came not from bullets, but from low-velocity fragments, torn steel from exploding flak shells and pieces of the bombers themselves. The skies over Europe had become a deadly crucible of metal. German anti-aircraft defenses, the Flugabwehrkanonen, or flak, were masterpieces of precision engineering. Years of war had refined them into instruments of terrifying efficiency. By late 1942, thousands of these guns encircled every strategic target. The standard 80 mm flak gun could send a shell to over 30,000 feet, each one timed to detonate at the exact altitude of incoming bombers. The explosions filled the air with hundreds of red-hot fragments, each capable of slicing through aircraft and flesh alike. Colonel Grow understood the medical implications instantly. The casualty data revealed that most fatal wounds were concentrated in the torso, 36% from chest injuries, 39% from abdominal hits. Combined, wounds to the body's core accounted for 3 out of every 4 deaths among bomber crews. The equation was simple: protect the torso, save lives. But there was no program for body armor in the United States Army Air Forces in 1942. The very idea seemed anachronistic, a relic from another age. During World War I, steel body armor had proven too heavy for infantrymen. But aerial warfare was a different world. Bomber crews didn't need to run. They needed to survive. They operated in confined metal tubes, already burdened with oxygen masks, parachutes, and flight suits. Mobility mattered less than protection. Their greatest threat wasn't a sniper bullet. It was shrapnel that had lost most of its killing energy before reaching them. Groh's medical training gave him a unique perspective. He understood wound ballistics, how energy was transferred from projectile to flesh. A fragment traveling a few hundred yards after a flak burst would have lost much of its velocity. Such debris could be stopped by thin metal plating, if it were worn on the body. In October 1942, Colonel Groh submitted a formal proposal to the 8th Air Force Headquarters, a plan to develop personal armor for bomber crews. Attached were casualty charts, sketches of overlapping metal plates sewn into fabric, inspired by medieval brigandine armor. The concept was simple: small plates, flexible yet strong, covering the vital organs. The response from command was skeptical. The word armor felt old-fashioned, impractical. Weight was a concern. Airmen already carried nearly 40 pounds of gear. Would they wear something heavier in combat? Could production even be scaled up? Some argued that improving fighter escorts would save more lives than armor ever could. But Groh didn't give up. He proposed an experiment, a limited field test. Produce a few prototypes, issue them to crews, and let the statistics speak. Headquarters finally agreed, with one caveat. The armor had to be developed fast, and it had to be built outside normal supply channels. The U.S. lacked the facilities to produce armor on short notice. So Groh turned to the British. The Royal Air Force had already dabbled in body armor for its bomber crews, but the cramped interiors of the Avro Lancaster had made bulky protection impossible. What didn't work for the RAF, Groh believed, might work for the Americans, whose B-17s and B-24s offered slightly more space. The British introduced Groh to the Wilkinson Sword Company, an unlikely partner with a remarkable pedigree. Founded in 1772, Wilkinson had built its name crafting swords, bayonets, and later, razors. But hidden within the company was a deep expertise in metallurgy, and a legacy of armor making that stretched back to the Victorian era. In October 1942, Groh arrived at the Wilkinson factory with his sketches and his data. What followed was a collaboration as improbable as it was brilliant. Military medicine joined forces with ancient craftsmanship. Groh brought knowledge of the human body. Wilkinson brought mastery of steel. Together they created a new kind of armor, designed not for knights, but for airmen. The final design came in 3 parts: a vest protecting the chest and back, an apron covering the abdomen and groin, optional panels for vulnerable positions like the ball turret. Each piece was built from 2-inch squares of manganese steel, just a millimeter thick, sewn into heavy canvas backed with cotton. The steel was hard enough to stop fragments, but light enough to wear in combat. The entire system weighed about 22 pounds, heavy, but not impossible. Most importantly, it included a quick release cord. Pull the red handle and the whole vest could be shed instantly. A life-saving feature for airmen forced to bail out of a burning plane. By early 1943, Wilkinson Sword had completed the first prototypes. Testing began in March. The results came quickly and dramatically. For the first time, wounded men arrived at field hospitals with armor that had worked. Surgeons found flak fragments embedded in steel plates, stopped cold before they could reach flesh. The data began to turn. The odds began to shift. By spring, word spread across the 8th Air Force. The armor saved lives. Crews demanded it, but production couldn't keep up. Wilkinson Sword could make perhaps 100 suits per month, a fraction of what was needed. So Groh turned homeward. In the summer of 1943, he arranged for American production to begin, a collaboration between military arsenals and civilian experts. Among the most unexpected partners, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Inside its Arms and Armor department, curator Stephen Grandsay and a team of craftsmen, men who normally restored priceless medieval armor, now turned their skills toward saving modern lives. They studied 15th century brigandines, suits of plate and chainmail, drawing inspiration from history to build the next evolution of protection. Their research produced the standardized M6 Flyer's armor vest, a design directly inspired by a brigandine dating to 1400. No armor that holds the slightest promise of adaptation is overlooked, Grandsay wrote in 1945. By mid-1943, American factories were producing armor at scale. The M1 vest, a refined version, replaced canvas with nylon for durability. The steel plates remained the same manganese alloy born from Groves and Wilkinson's collaboration. Then, on October 5, 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces made it official. The M1 Flyer's vest was adopted as standard issue for all 8th Air Force bomber crews. A revolution had taken place, quietly, efficiently, and born not from weapons, but from compassion and science. Colonel Malcolm Grove's question, "Can we protect them?" had changed the mathematics of war. And for thousands of young airmen flying into the black flak-filled skies over Europe, that question meant the difference between coming home and becoming one more name on a telegram. As the air war raged over Europe, American bomber crews were learning that courage alone couldn't stop a piece of flying metal. The Army Air Forces needed something more, protection born not of steel factories or weapons labs, but of medical insight and desperate necessity. Each man aboard a bomber received armor tailored to his battlefield in the sky. Ball turret gunners, entombed in glass and steel beneath the fuselage, were issued the M3 apron, shaped to fit their cramped, vulnerable positions. Waist gunners received the M4, designed for the exposed, standing stations where danger came from every direction. Seated crew, bombardiers, navigators, and radio operators wore the M5 groin shield, an extra layer against fragments that could shred a man in an instant. The modular system allowed each airman to build his own defense, tailored to his post and the way death might come for him. Skepticism faded quickly. Once crews saw how the armor performed in battle, resistance vanished. By early 1944, the armor program had expanded, evolving from an experiment to a lifeline. The M3 flying helmet, designed specifically for bomber crews, replaced the infantry's thin shell. It layered overlapping strips of manganese steel over a leather base, deflecting fragments that would slice through ordinary helmets. Among the most innovative designs was the Grove helmet, named for its creator, Colonel Malcolm Grove, a masterwork of 5 interlocking steel strips, capable of stopping shrapnel that no previous helmet could. The results spoke in blood and numbers. A comprehensive study by 8th Air Force medical officers examined 1,117 casualties from heavy bombardment groups. The data was devastating and revealing. Among crews without armor, 36% of men struck in the chest died. 39% of abdominal wounds proved fatal. Among armored crews, those numbers plunged to 8% and 7%. That meant a 77% reduction in fatal chest wounds and an 82% reduction in abdominal deaths. For the first time in the air war, statistics were saving lives. The armor wasn't perfect. Head wounds remained as deadly as ever. Limbs could still be shattered. And a direct hit from a 20mm cannon shell could obliterate man and machine alike. But against the true killer, shrapnel, the armor worked. It didn't make men invincible, but it gave them a fighting chance. Then came the day that tested everything. October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, 291 B-17 bombers roared toward Schweinfurt, Germany, in the second raid on its ball-bearing factories. When they returned, 60 were gone. 17 more were destroyed beyond repair. 121 limped home, riddled with holes. Over 20% of the attacking force had vanished in a single mission. But inside the surviving planes, medical officers found proof of salvation. Flak vests, ripped, scarred, and dented, had caught fragments that would have ended lives. Steel plates now bore silent witness to near-death escapes. The armor couldn't stop every loss, but it had saved countless men from joining the long roll of the missing. Even so, armor alone could not win the air war. The skies over Germany were still ruled by Luftwaffe fighters. The turning point came not from steel but from speed and range, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang. With its long reach and deadly precision, it could now escort bombers deep into enemy territory. For the first time, bomber crews weren't alone. Together, Mustangs above, armor within, they forged a new balance of power. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, the 8th Air Force had become a hardened, disciplined machine. Precision strikes crippled German defenses and supply lines, while nearly every airman flew, protected by armor that only a year before had been a prototype. Production lines had caught up. By war's end, America had built 338,180 M1 vests and 95,919 M2 models. The achievement was staggering, a testament to wartime ingenuity and urgency. What made it even more remarkable was the speed. From Colonel Groh's first sketches in October 1942 to mass production by late 1943, just 1 year. In that time, the Allies had developed, tested, and fielded a life-saving system that would define combat survival for decades to come. It wasn't just an American story, it was a collaboration that spanned nations. The British Wilkinson Sword Company, once makers of blades for knights, produced the first prototypes. Their metallurgists fine-tuned the steel alloy. The UK supplied 9,600 flak vests to the USAAF under reverse Lend-Lease. American factories scaled up the design, refining it with input from unlikely places. Even the Metropolitan Museum of Art, whose curators studied medieval armor to help shape the design of modern protection. And at the center of it all was Colonel Malcolm Groh, doctor, innovator, and relentless advocate for the men he served. His vision went far beyond steel. He introduced improved oxygen systems to fight hypoxia, heated flight suits to prevent frostbite, and rest homes for airmen broken by exhaustion and trauma. He pioneered psychiatric screening and recovery programs that would later become standard practice. He didn't just want to keep men alive, he wanted to keep them whole. In July 1943, he received the Legion of Merit for his groundbreaking armor program, cited for reducing wounds caused by low-velocity missiles and boosting crew morale. Less than a year later, in May 1944, he earned the Distinguished Service Medal for innovations that ranged from wind blast protection for gunners to electrically heated gloves and combat rations for long missions. His work reduced frostbite, increased endurance, and saved lives. After the war, Groh's legacy only expanded. He became acting air surgeon in 1945, air surgeon in 1946, and finally in 1949, the first Surgeon General of the United States Air Force, a fitting title for the man who had protected more airmen than any weapon or strategy ever could. When Major General Malcolm Groh passed away in 1960, he left behind not only a generation of men who lived because of his ideas, but an enduring principle, that in war, protection can be as powerful as offense. His innovations shaped the Korean War's M1952 vest, the Vietnam-era flak jackets, and every piece of modern body armor used today. From the medieval brigandine to Kevlar and ceramic plates, every bulletproof vest worn by soldier or police officer carries his legacy. Colonel Malcolm Groh didn't win a single dogfight. He didn't lead a bombing run, but his armor saved thousands who did. And in that quiet, steady triumph, born of data, compassion, and sheer will, he changed the face of modern warfare forever.